We look at world events and I see things that are almost difficult to believe, almost difficult to believe how such a thing could happen. Right now, as we speak, there is a terrible genocide impending. Tens of thousands of people have been killed as of September, and over 10 million people have been displaced. More than 2 million, at least 2.1 million, but probably higher, have been forced to leave the country as refugees, over 2 million. And another 7.7 million, but probably higher than 8, have been forced out of their towns, their villages, their neighborhoods, their homes. Over 10 million. On top of that, there is an agricultural failure related to the war that has left 14 million people hungry, 14 million hungry, and 1.5 million, many of them children, facing starvation. 14 million hungry people, 1.5 million facing starvation, and it's getting worse by the day. Tens of thousands killed. If you look at the news, it's always about Israel and about the Palestinian Arabs and about Gaza and about Lebanon. This is the whole focus. But what I've been speaking about just now is Sudan. Sudan. There was a civil war in Sudan after about 3.3 or 3.4 million Christians, black African Christians, were murdered by Muslims. The Janjaweed militias, Islamic militias of black African Muslims, and the Arab-controlled military of Sudan massacred Christians in droves. Nobody said anything, hardly. Sudan was then split into 2 countries, finally, after millions of Christians had been slaughtered. Well, now the Christians are gone. Now it's just Muslims in Sudan. The Arab Muslims who control the military, that is the Sudan Armed Forces, and the former Janjaweed, now called the Special Relief Force or the Special Support Force, are battling each other. The Arab Muslims and the black African Muslims are engaged in a civil war, slaughtering each other. And as took place with Mengistu in Ethiopia, in the Horn of Africa, food, starvation is being used as a military weapon. Muslims against Muslims. You won't find it on page 1 of a major newspaper. You won't find it on page 2. You won't find it on page 3. It's on the internet, but you have to search for it. No, everybody's talking about Gaza or Lebanon or Israel or the Palestinian Arabs. The much worse human disasters taking place in Khartoum and Darfur are ignored. When Muslims perpetrate genocide against each other, the world ignores it. Remember, as the scriptures tell us, Ishmael's seed will always be divided. Esau's sword will be against his brother. The only uniting element in Islam is jihad against the infidel. If Muslims are not killing Christians and Jews, they will kill each other every time. Islam has brought a curse on the Muslim world and certainly on the Arab world. Ishmael's seed will always be divided. Esau's sword will be against his brother until and unless they turn to the seed of Abraham, their father, Yeshua HaMashiach in Arabic, Yeshua HaMashiach in Hebrew, Jesus. This is the reality. You see what's happening with the Houthis in Yemen, attacking international shipping going through the Suez Canal devastating the economy of Egypt. What happened in Yemen? 400,000 Muslims were killed. By who? By other Muslims. 400,000. Now, in the exaggerated figures being put out by Hamas and the Muslim media, Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya, and what's coming out of Qatar, and even the Western media are taking the casualty figures and the fatality statistics of Hamas at face value as if they were telling the truth. In fact, they're amplifying and overblowing the numbers killed, as they always lie, but it's being reported as factual. 42,000 people have been killed in Gaza. Even if that were true, the Israelis targeted Hamas terrorists and their supporters. The civilians killed and the children tragically killed lost their lives because Hamas uses their civilians and their children as human shields. A mosque, a hospital, a school to Hamas is an arms depot. It's a place you store arms, munitions, and ordnance to attack Israel, to kill Israeli civilians. It's an arsenal. So that when in self-defense, Israel has to strike back and hit those arsenals, you're going to have civilian casualties, despite the efforts of Israel to limit them. Even doing things like making phone calls on cell phones and warning people to get out ahead of time. Things that, of course, Hamas and Hezbollah never do. Yet Israel is accused of genocide, even if it were true, which it is not, but even if it were. Even if it were true, the 40,000 or 42,000 is nothing compared to what happened in Yemen. 10 times more. 10 times more. Muslims, civilians, children were killed by other Muslims just in Yemen. But Yemen's not the worst of it. Not by a long shot. In Syria, an educated guess by most estimations, some say it is higher, is approximately 700,000 Syrians, most of them Muslims, some of them Christians, killed by the regime of Assad that is backed by Iran and armed in part by Iran and by Russia. The Wagner Group, Russian munitions and weapons, and Iranian weapons are also fueling the war in Sudan, where Muslims kill each other. They kill each other in Sudan, they kill each other in Yemen, they kill each other in Syria. When what is today called Fatah was then called the PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization of Yasser Arafat, tried to take over the government, the Hashemite regime of Jordan, in September of 1970, known as Black September. $10,000, 20,000, nearly 20,000 Palestinian Arabs were systematically decimated, slaughtered by the British trained and armed Jordanian Legion, backed by General al-Haq from Pakistan. Abdul al-Haq from Pakistan was brought in as a military advisor with the backing of the Pakistani military and government to support the Hashemite regime of King Hussein of Jordan. And they wiped out by the thousands and thousands Palestinian Arabs following Yasser Arafat, today called Fatah, and drove thousands and thousands and thousands more out of Jordan into Lebanon, into refugee camps. And then Israel gets blamed for the refugee problem, when in fact most of them came from Jordan. Lie upon lie upon lie. You think about it. It's unbelievable. It's 20 times worse. 20 times worse. No, more than 20 times worse. In Syria. Of course, we are supposed to forget the civil war that took place in Lebanon, where it was Palestinian Arab against Palestinian Arab, and we're supposed to forget that when Israel left Gaza in 2005, hoping for peace, the civil war between Fatah and Hamas saw 25,000 Arab Muslims killed by each other. But we're supposed to forget that. What Israel does in self-defense is considered to be the great slaughter, the great atrocity, the great humanitarian injustice. When in fact it's not even 1/10, not even 1/20th of what the Arab Muslim world has done to each other and has done to Palestinian Arabs. No. Go onto the news, into a news website, you'll find Gaza, Lebanon, Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah. But they ignore something astronomically worse taking place in Sudan. They ignore something that was 10 times worse in terms of casualty figures in Yemen. They ignore something. How many times does 40,000 go into 700,000? In Syria and more. If you hunted on the internet, you would have seen when the Israelis eliminated Nasrallah, Lebanese Sunni Muslims, Lebanese Christians, and Lebanese Druzis were dancing and celebrating and thanking Israel for killing Nasrallah. In Syria, in northern Syria, in Aleppo, people were dancing and celebrating Nasrallah was killed, thanking Israel. In Iran, graffiti on the walls, thanking Netanyahu and Israel for killing Nasrallah. But that's not the narrative. The capacity of the mainstream media to lie is unbelievable. The biases of the New York Times, the BBC, CNN, MSNBC, etc., is unbelievable. Unbelievable. But lie, misrepresent, distort, tell half-truths, they do. And so it goes on. Of course, we're told in the book of Zechariah, chapter 12, God sees these injustices and this hypocrisy. They don't care about Arab children. They're using them as human shields. They don't care about a two-state solution. Twice Ehud Barak, and then on top of Ehud Barak in White River, 3 times the Palestinian Arabs were offered a two-state solution. And 3 times Fatah rejected it. Hamas rejects it. Israel has no right to exist from the river to the sea. Nothing short of that. They don't want a two-state solution, not to mention the one they've always had in Jordan, where demographically most of the people are Palestinian Arab. As I pointed out before, both Yasser Arafat and King Hussein of Jordan in 1968 and 1970, respectively, stated that Jordan is Palestine. They rejected it. When it was offered to them, they turned it down. No, the media will not tell you the truth. God's word will tell you the truth. Individual websites will tell you the truth. But the mainstream media, the academic establishment, the governments, including the American and British governments, they're not going to tell you the truth. The United Nations UNIFIL forces were deployed in Lebanon when the Israelis withdrew, with the agreement they would not allow southern Lebanon to become a terrorist platform to fire rockets into Israel, which is why the Israelis invaded Lebanon to begin with. The Israelis bought this deal, withdrew from Lebanon, and UNIFIL came in. The blue helmets, UNIFIL. They were supposed to keep Hezbollah combatants and others north of the Litani River in Lebanon. They failed. They failed in their mission. They didn't do it. For a year, once again, Hezbollah, backed by Iran, is firing missiles and rockets and drones into Galilee, making 80,000 Israelis refugees in their own country. They had to leave their homes in Metula and in other such cities along the border. They had to withdraw. They had to take their children out of school. They had to leave their homes in Kiryat Shmona, Metula, Rosh Hanekra, because the UN failed to do what it was supposed to. When Israel responds in self-defense, the UN says, no, we're staying here. We're not leaving. The Israelis say, wait a minute, we don't want you to get caught in the crossfire. You didn't stop it. You didn't do your job. Now leave so we can do the job you should have done. You didn't prevent this from happening. Now we have to defend our country and our people. No, we're staying. And when UNIFIL troops get caught in the crossfire, it's Israel's fault. You couldn't make this hypocrisy up. Do you see the UN going on every day about what's happening in Sudan or Syria? No, you don't. No, you don't. And what about what the Muslims are even doing in Bangladesh to religious minorities? All over the place, it's the same. But when somebody dares to stand up to jihad, the Muslims make themselves the victim, and the media plays up to them. This is beyond hypocritical, but it is reality. Am I saying the Israeli government are perfect? No, they are not. No government is. But it's Israel who are the victims. Any Arabs being killed by Israel are either terrorists, supporters of terror, or they're being killed by collateral damage because Hamas and Hezbollah use them as human shields. This is what's happening. And you always see the weapons coming from the same place. Russia, that's invaded Ukraine. You see the Wagner Group. And above all, you see the hand of Iran. Iran, where did Iran get the weapons, or where did Iran get the money for the weapons and for the ordnance? Well, they got it from Barack Obama and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, but that is another story. The Americans, while Iran was funding international terror, killing Americans and others, they lifted oil sanctions and embargoes on Iran, putting hundreds of millions of dollars into the hands of the mullahs to fund a terrorist radical Muslim war machine. For the second time, Israel has been hit with not just rockets, but this time ballistic missiles from Iran. And for the second time, the corrupt American government is telling Israel not to strike back or to limit your response. Don't interfere with their nuclear program. Don't bomb their nuclear. How are they going to get atomic weapons and threaten the world if you dare bomb their nuclear sites? This is what Biden is saying. Don't bomb their oil resources. How are they going to get money to fund terror if you do that? And now we see the Biden administration threatening Israel with an arms embargo, in part, if they don't allow further humanitarian aid to come into Gaza. I have a question. Unless the Israeli hostages are released, assuming they haven't been murdered, which some of them already have, why should the Israelis let any humanitarian aid into Gaza? Give us our hostages and stop using your own as hostages. Stop holding your own people hostage. Let our hostages go and we will let the humanitarian aid in. That's what should have been done. Instead, humanitarian aid flooded in, where you have the United Nations Relief and Work Agency collaborating with Hamas. And the aid was going into the hands of Hamas, not directly to the people. They were misappropriating it for themselves, in some cases selling it. Why should any aid go in while you're holding hostages? Give us the hostages, we'll let the aid go in. No, you can't do that, says the Biden administration and Harris and Blinken and Austin and Jake Sullivan. You can't do that. Her Majesty's British government is worse. They're threatening prosecutions of Israeli government ministers for not allowing more aid. Some is going in, but not allowing more in, without the hostages being released. None of this makes any sense. None of it reflects any sense of justice or equity or fair play. None of it. We can see why God becomes very angry over this kind of injustice perpetrated against his ancient people. We see this in Obadiah, verse 15. We see this in Zechariah chapter 12. And again, I am not defending everything the Israeli government does. God has a controversy with Israel because most Jews have rejected their own Messiah, and God is allowing these calamities to come upon them, even in their own land, because he's dealing with their rejection of their Messiah, and he's dealing with their sin. Yes, it was horrible. 1,300 people were murdered October 7th of 2023. But how many babies are aborted in Israel? It has one of the highest non-therapeutic abortion rates in the world. The modern state of Israel has killed more Jewish children than Adolf Hitler, more than the Nazis. It is not a righteous nation. It is not a righteous people. God has a controversy with them. but they are his people, and he will deal with them. And God also has a promise for Abraham's other descendants, the Arabs. But they're being robbed of the blessings God promised in Genesis chapter 36 and other passages by the false religion of Islam, particularly its radical elements. These terrible things are happening to the descendants of Abraham, both Jew and Arab. But neither the United Nations, the United States, the United Kingdom, none of them have a balanced, much less biblical perspective or understanding of what is happening and why. Bible-believing Christians need to. It is imperative that they do.